Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Robert Conrad, Cleveland State University, the Chautauqua Institution, the Payne Fund, and the United Black Fund of Greater Cleveland, Incorporated.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the City Club of Cleveland. I'm Pete Van Leer, the Executive Director of the Cleveland Transformation Alliance and a proud City Club member. It's my pleasure to welcome today's speaker, the Director of the Education Policy and Management Master's Program at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, Dr. Karen L. Mapp. During the City Club's Resilient Families series, we've explored many facets that affect families and their ability to succeed: poverty, child abuse and neglect, and incarceration, and learn about theoretical frameworks that can guide future policymaking and program design. Thanks to the generous support of the St. Luke's Foundation and the William J. and Dorothy K. O'Neill Foundation, we're able to continue the series for another year. Today, we turn our attention to the educational partnerships between families, community members, and educators that contribute to student success. Over the past 20 years, Dr. Mapp's research and practice focus has been on the cultivation of partnerships among families, community members, and educators that support student achievement and school improvement. She served as the co-coordinator of the Community Organizing and School Reform Research Project as a core faculty member in the Doctorate in Educational Leadership program at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. She's also a founding member of the District Leaders Network on Family and Community Engagement, is a trustee of the Hyams Foundation in Boston, and is on the board of the Institute for Educational Leadership in Washington, D.C. From 2011 to 2013, Dr. Mapp served as a consultant on family engagement to the United States Department of Education in the Office of Innovation and Improvement. She currently serves as a consultant to the Family and Community Engagement Division of Scholastic, Inc. She joined the Harvard Graduate School of Education in January 2005, after serving for 18 months as a Deputy Superintendent for Family and Community Engagement for Boston Public Schools. Dr. Mapp holds a doctorate and master's of education from Harvard University in Administration, Planning, and Social Policy, a master's in counselor education from Southern Connecticut State University, and a bachelor's degree in psychology from Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. In 1997, she was awarded a Spencer Dissertation Fellowship for her research on how and why families are involved in their children's educational development. Ladies and gentlemen, members and friends of the City Club of Cleveland, please join me in welcoming Dr. Karen L. Mapp.
Good afternoon, everyone. It's a real honor to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. And I'm going to really jump into my presentation because I have about 4 hours of information to share with you in about 30 minutes, right? So we'll see how I do. We'll have a chance for a Q&A, but I really want to share some of this powerful information with you. So the title of my talk is Powerful Partnerships, and I first want to explain to you what I mean by that, and I'm going to give you an example. When I was Deputy Superintendent for Family and Community Engagement for Boston, I often called families my clients. And I wanted my school leaders to see our families as clients because I had sort of Nordstrom's dancing in my head. So for any of you who have ever shopped at a Nordstrom's, you'll know that one of the things that we love about them is they have superb customer service, right? Go out of their way for their clients. So I was thinking, if I use that terminology, that perhaps my principals would start treating our families with a little bit more respect. But what I found out, ladies and gentlemen, was when I started really working with families, they told me, we don't want to be clients. We really want to be full partners in the education of our children. In fact, we want to be what we call in the research community co-producers and co-creators of educational change. Right? So I've been transformed. Here's somebody who's been doing family engagement work for 20 plus years. And I was transformed in my thinking. So when we talk about powerful partnerships today, we really mean that. Partnerships where families and community members and school practitioners and people in the community are seen as equal partners. Equal partners. These are authentic, respectful, and trusting partnerships between home, school, and the community. So what I'm going to talk to you about today, I've got two goals. First of all, to share with you what we know from the research now about why are these kinds of partnerships so important. I usually call this the where's the beef part of my presentation. How many of you in the audience remember the where's the beef lady, right? By the way, we're all dating ourselves. That's why some of you decided maybe you didn't want to raise your hand so high. I understand that. But what she was saying was that, if I'm going to spend my resources on this hamburger, I expect to see evidence of, some beef in there. I don't want to open up the bun and see a hockey puck. I want to see something that's substantive. And so for a lot of us in the audience and for a lot of our practitioners, the question around why powerful partnerships is, where's the beef? What are we going to see happen if we engage in these types of partnerships? And then the second part of my talk today, we'll talk about actually how do we cultivate these powerful partnerships. And I'm going to focus on between home and schools. Okay? So let's see what we can do in the short time we have. So why are partnerships so powerful? Where's the beef? Why do we want to do this? Why do we want to make sure we infuse partnerships in our work of trying to improve schools and student achievement? So I'm going to talk about the impact on students, on families, but also on our practitioners. So what do we know about the impact of partnerships on students? Well, we know that when family and schools work together, we see students who have faster rates of literacy acquisition. These are students who earn higher grades and test scores. This is a recent study out of Johns Hopkins University that was looking at the impact of these partnerships, cultivating these partnerships on student performance. They also were looking at the impact of partnerships on attendance. And what they saw was that families that received a home visit from these schools, and this is a study that's done in Washington, D.C., these students had 24% fewer absences than similar students whose families did not receive a visit. And they also saw that these same students were also more likely to read at or above grade level compared to similar students. So this is from the partnership itself. The families were not being taught how to do, literacy practices at home. This was just building that partnership, building that culture between home and school of trust and respect, where people want to listen to each other, want to respond to each other, and this is what we see in terms of direct impact on the kids. Thank you, Dan, for mentioning my new book, Powerful Partnerships. And I want to read an excerpt from the book, which sort of illustrates what we're talking about in terms of these changes in our students when home and school collaborate. So this is a story told by Eileen Carver. She's a teacher in the Boston Public Schools. She's actually a co-author on the book, Powerful Partnerships. I felt like I could not write a book that was authentic about partnerships between home and school unless I wrote it with teachers. And so I have two teachers that I collaborated with on this project, Eileen and Jessica Lander. So here's something where Eileen is talking a little bit about this relationship that she was able to build with a parent and the consequences for that child. So she talks about Jorge. So Jorge's story. Jorge entered our second grade classroom as a new student to the school. He is an English language learner and Spanish is the language spoken at home. When Jorge arrived, he didn't yet know any of the sounds that letters make. On a reading assessment in late September, he scored at an early kindergarten level. So this is a second grade class. At the mid-October family conference, both Jorge and his mother were in tears. It was devastating to be 7 years old and not to be able to read. During the conference, Jorge set a goal to improve his reading. He pledged to read every chance he got, and his mother promised to sit with Jorge each night and listen to him read. Jorge joined a reading intervention group at school, and I sent home many books for him to read, exchanging the books as he mastered them. In less than 2 months, Jorge could identify all the sounds the letters make, and he had increased his reading by 2 levels. In late November, Jorge was reading at an end of kindergarten level with 6 months of the school year still ahead. At the next family conference, Jorge's mother spoke about how she renewed her commitment to listen to Jorge read at home once she understood its importance. Without a doubt, Jorge's ability to make reading progress was multiplied by the home school connection. So this is a teacher who goes out of her way to make sure that she builds a bond with an adult of every single student in her classroom. Eileen would tell you, she's been teaching now for over 20 years, that she has never met a student who didn't have a caring adult somewhere in their universe who was willing to work with a school staff person if the school invited them in. One of the things I will tell you, ladies and gentlemen, is I have never met a parent who didn't care about their children's education and their children's improvement. So when I hear this thing sometimes in districts that parents don't care, what I often find is that parents do care, but they're running into institutions that aren't inviting. So what else do we see in terms of impact on students? These are the kids who enroll in higher grades and higher level programs. So these are the students you're going to see in your international baccalaureate programs, your AP and honors programs. They're promoted on time and earn more credits. They adapt better to school and attend more regularly, so we saw evidence of that already. They have better social skills and behavior. There's nothing like the children knowing that teacher knows grandma, grandpa, auntie, uncle, right? Very different behavior. I have seen in some instances children moving from one classroom to the other, and you didn't know that they were the same kids. But that teacher actually knows their family. And by the way, I want to mention that when I say family or parent in my presentation, I mean all adult caretakers. Because we all know that our children are being raised by maybe auntie or grandma or foster parents, etc. These are also the kids that graduate and go on to higher education. So these are the impact on the students, but let's talk about the impact on the families themselves. We often see that when families are invited and respected by school staff, and they start to feel like true partners in their children's education, their perception of what Kathleen Hoover Dempsey, colleague of mine who's done research in the family engagement world for many years, she talks about parents start to shift their job description, or what we say in the research community, their role construction. They start to really see that, I can do this. I can be engaged. And this is very important because a lot of our families, particularly those who may not have gone on to higher education or graduated from high school themselves or speak a different language, a lot of times they don't really think they can be engaged in a way that's going to support their children's learning and development. So they start to change the perception of their role because they start to see that engagement can take on many, many, many forms. They start to gain confidence, their self-efficacy in being able to help support their children's learning and development, and possibly in school reform begins to take shape. They see that they can do it, they see the fruits of their labor, and they gain that confidence. They also start to change in terms of their sense of accountability to their school or neighborhood. And they start to shift from just advocating for their own child to advocating for everybody's children. Because now they see that many times a lot of the concerns that they had for their own children are shared by other parents. They start to see that perhaps some of the things that they're doing for their child could be very helpful for other children. Families are empowered to take on new challenges in terms of their own education and careers. I'm sure there are many people here in this room who could tell stories about families who started to really get engaged in their children's education. And they then said, I think I'm going to go on and get my GED, or I'm going to go on and go back to college. Some of you may be familiar with the Grow Your Own Teacher program in Chicago, Illinois. And what they found was that families just working as mentors in the classroom began to say, maybe teaching is a career that I'd like to pursue. And so this was a way of getting parents to move on, get their degree, and come back into the community and teach. And then finally, and I know that one of the things about the Cleveland Club is about civic engagement, families started to see themselves as political actors. They started to see themselves as being able to participate more fully in the democracy. So this isn't just about helping parents to understand how to do the homework or helping parents understand about sort of the literacy curriculum. It's about families feeling more fully empowered in many, many different ways to not only support their children, the community, but also themselves. So now let's talk about the where's the beef when it comes to the educators. What we find is that teachers stay in schools where families are engaged. And we're talking about schools that may be in high poverty communities, which is where many of us know that it's hard to keep our teachers. Schools where perhaps we're doing turnaround, it's very hard to keep our teachers. But a study in Chicago has found that if those schools have strong partnerships with families, those teachers stay. So a lot of you are familiar with the term ROI, return on investment. Well, this is a big one for school budgets because school budgets, the majority of the budget is spent on personnel. And we spend a lot of time training our teachers, giving them good professional development, but to have them leave is devastating, not only spiritually, but economically devastating. And so what do we want to do? Everything we could to keep our teachers in our schools? Well, one of the things we know is by engaging our families, they want to stay. So one of the things that we are starting to see is that this partnership, this powerful partnership, actually has an impact on changing how we see each other. And so many of you probably have heard this term implicit bias. And Beverly Tatum, in her book, Why Do All the Black Children Sit Together in the Cafeteria? I don't know if I got that exactly right, but she has a new one out, by the way, that's absolutely fantastic. She talks about the smog of racism. The smog of racism. And what she says is that, if you live here in the United States, you breathe in that smog. And a lot of us may try to say, well, we don't have a racist bone in our body, or we don't have bias. But her theory is that you can't not have it if you live here, because it's in the films that we watch every day. It's in the policies that sometimes we make and unintentionally do things that may support a racist system. And so how do we change that? Well, one of the things that we are seeing is that by building these partnerships between home and school, where very often we have people who come from different backgrounds, different cultures working together, we are starting to see that their implicit biases about each other are changing. That's pretty powerful. So there's a study that's just been published by RTI International, and it's actually on the power of home visits to shift people's mindsets about each other. So in fact, this was just published a couple of months ago. We were blessed to have someone talk about this at the Parent-Teacher Home Visit conference that was held last week in Sacramento. And here's what they discovered. Their early findings are suggesting that educators shift their beliefs and actions related to families and students, and families also shift their beliefs and actions about educators and schools. So what does that mean? We heard stories from teachers who talked about, before I went into the homes of my families, I really have to admit that I had this vision of them, which was that they didn't care about their kids' education, that they weren't capable of actually supporting their children's education. They didn't have the capacity to do that. I thought that their neighborhoods were so dysfunctional that they couldn't possibly have anything to offer in terms of supporting their kids' education. But after I met the families and talked to them, and we were able to share stories about each other, to learn that we all wanted the same thing, my attitude about those parents changed significantly. Now, I have to be honest with you, there should have been boxes of tissues on every table because many of the stories, people were weeping about how powerful building these partnerships with families, and conversely, parents talking about building these partnerships with teachers and other practitioners had just changed their way of seeing each other. So I actually want to read you a quote. This actually is a video clip by Flamboyant Foundation, and also we did some video clips of teachers talking about this for an online class that I have on family engagement. This is Melissa Bryant. She's a teacher at the Stanton Elementary School in Washington, D.C. And she's talking about how her new partnerships with families have changed how she sees families, how she reacts to families, how she talks to families. So let me read you this quote from Melissa. Even when I'd have to have tough conversations with parents and I don't get the response that I want, it's never, ugh, I'm judging you right now. Now, I don't have love for you. Now, I don't like you. Now, I'm not going to work as hard for you. Instead of that, it's, man, I wonder what's going on. Like, hey, there's something going on and you need some help. Let me know, because I actually know you care about your kid, right? I automatically now always come from a place of care and of love. And I'm not selfish with my love anymore. In the beginning, I was very selfish with it. I decided who I was going to do with what, or who I was going to do what with. But now, it's just made me just a little bit better of a human being. Because in general, I always think not to judge, but first to ask questions and try to figure out what to do. And I was never like that before. So this is a teacher talking about how before what she did was she judged parents. She put them in boxes. So if you responded to me, then yes, I would respond back to you. If you didn't do what I said, if I asked you to do something with your kid and you didn't respond, I put you in a box that said, this parent doesn't care. But now she uses this word very freely, love. Love. I show love to my parents. And you know, when I teach my students in my class, ladies and gentlemen, I tell them, I start out the semester with this. I say, you know, if you don't think that you can love the parents and the children that you're teaching every day, then I prefer that you find a different profession. Okay? Because that's really what this work takes. It takes that kind of love, that kind of caring. Because this is a hard job, teaching. How many of you in this room, do we have any teachers in the room? Okay, I know, thank you so much for being here, because I know it's very hard to have our teachers come out of their classrooms. But this is the kind of thing that teachers tell me keeps them in the classroom. Sharing that love with families, because the families share that love back with you. One of the other reasons this love is so important, ladies and gentlemen, is because of a finding that is in a new book that's coming out by one of my colleagues and one of my former students, Sue Hung. Sue Hung is a professor at Wellesley College, and she's doing a wonderful book on family engagement. And what she found was that the barriers between home and school have to do with something called generational disrespect. Generational disrespect. And this is that disrespect that could be passed on for generations. When you have a group or a family that, because of the color of their skin or the language that they speak, experienced what they felt as disrespect from our institutions, that passes on from generation to generation, especially when that cycle is not broken through love. And so You know, some of our families went to some of the same schools that they are now sending their children. And some of them say to me, you know, I'm not going to that building. Mrs. Johnson is still there. And I remember how I was treated. You know, so it's that generational disrespect, those barriers that we have to break through in order to really build those powerful partnerships with our families. So now let me talk about how do we actually cultivate these partnerships. What do we do to build these powerful partnerships between home and school? So in 2011, I was asked by Secretary Arne Duncan to come to the Department of Education and to work with them to come up with some ideas for how we're going to be able to build the capacity of our schools and our districts and our states to do more authentic family engagement, what I call, and what my colleague Heather Weiss calls, thick family engagement versus thin family engagement, right? Thin family engagement are the bake sales and the fundraisers and only asking our families to come to these open houses where we sort of share the rules and regulations of the school with them, versus thick, which is that co-producer and co-creator relationship that I talk about. So I was able to work on a piece called the Dual Capacity Framework for Family School Partnerships. I'm not going to have time to go through that, but we did write a piece called Partners in Education, which you can get on the web, which explains the components that really lead to these effective and powerful partnerships. So I'm just going to quickly go over with you what I call the essential conditions and practices to cultivate these partnerships. So I've talked already about how you have to build respectful and trusting relationships. Relationships are key to any of the work you do. So you know how when we buy a home or we're looking for a place to put a business, what are the 3 things that everybody says are most important? Location, 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 right? Everybody around the world knows this, by the way, because I've given this speech in various parts of the world. I ask this question, everybody knows. So when I talk about what are the keys to powerful partnerships, 3 things: relationship, relationship, relationship. We have too many districts that put together all of these wonderful family engagement programs and activities, and then when nobody shows up, they want to blame the families. They don't care. Well, if you haven't built that relationship first with your families, they're not going to come. Okay? Very important. So that's number 1. Number 2, you've got to link your family engagement events and initiatives to learning and developmental goals. So that means if you have decided as a district that you're focusing on literacy or you're focusing on certain math concepts in certain grades, then guess what? Your family engagement initiatives should also be focused on that. Families want to know what it is that their children should know and be able to do. In fact, there's another new report out by Learning Heroes. They did all sorts of interviews with families. And what they found out was families really want to know what their child is expected to do. The question was, what things would be extremely helpful in my efforts to support my children's success? Number 1, detailed explanation of what my child is expected to learn this year, and also help me with activities that I might be able to do at home to support my children's learning and development. Think about that open house, ladies and gentlemen, that we normally go to. Do our families walk out of there with a new tip or tool for how to support their children's learning? And have we practiced it at that event? Not just handed them a piece of paper and said, Mrs. Jones, go do this at home. Thank you very much. Okay? We've got to give our families a chance to practice. We have to adopt an asset-based developmental lens with our families. Again, this goes back to the co-producer and co-creator. Families have, how many of you in this room are parents? Okay, wonderful. Bless you. You have something called parent knowledge, which is unique. You know your child better than anybody else, with the exception of your partner or someone else who is close to your son or daughter. That parent knowledge, we need that to be the best educators we can possibly be. And so why would we want to turn that away? We need to see our families through a strength-based lens. A lot of times, unintentionally, and again, this goes back to that implicit bias, we see our families through a deficit-based lens. We don't see them as having skills and knowledge. But as I said, they have parent knowledge, which is something that we really need to be the best educators we can be. That's why the partnerships are so important. So we want to collaborate and honor our stakeholders' funds of knowledge. That's that knowledge I was talking about. And we want to use interactive approaches to build capacity. Just handing families lists doesn't cut it. We have to make sure that whatever we do is interactive. So I want to just share with you some additional support and resources for the work of family engagement and building powerful partnerships. There is an annual event, a family and community engagement conference, and look at where it's being held. Okay? Right here in Cleveland. So July 11th through the 13th, 2018, Tracy Hill will be very much engaged in pulling that together. We are very honored that Cleveland will be hosting this fabulous conference. It has grown over the past 5+ years. We started out with about 700 participants. Now it's up to almost 2,000 participants. I actually give an institute at Harvard because what's wonderful about these events that I'm at here today is I get to meet all of you, but one of the things that happens is that I have people running up to me saying, can you come to my district? Can you come to my school? Can you come to all sorts of events? And so what I do now is I have a summer institute at Harvard for 3.5 days, and we do a deep dive into family school partnerships. We have a new association now for family engagement, the National Association of Family, School, and Community Engagement, NAFSCE. And then Scholastic has been very wonderful in supporting this work, and so they actually have workshops for school teams on family engagement. And I made it, Dan. It is 1:05. And I hope it made sense. As I said, I was trying to share a lot of information with you in a very short period of time. This is my Twitter handle, @Karen_Mapp. So please join me. I try to share information and resources about family school partnerships on my Twitter feed. No, I'm not going to share with you my recipe for macaroni and cheese on my Twitter account. I try to sort of stick with the family engagement. So thank you very much, and I'm going to entertain questions at this time. Thank you.
Don't downplay the mac and cheese. I happen to believe that mac and cheese can bring more parents to the table. I'm Dan Multhrop, Chief Executive here at the City Club, and today we're enjoying a Friday Forum with Dr. Karen L. Mapp, Program Director of the Education Policy and Management Master's Program at the Harvard Graduate School of Education in Cambridge, Massachusetts. We're about to begin the audience Q&A, and we welcome questions from everyone, City Club members, guests, students, and those of you joining us via our radio broadcast or our webcast. If you'd like to tweet a question, you can tweet it at the City Club, and our team will work it into the program. Holding our microphones today are Content Coordinator Bliss Davis and Youth Forum Council Chair Tiolu Orsanya. May we have our first question, please?
This is a thrilling picture you paint for us. Thank you very much. There's a word I don't think I heard you use. It's the word power. And it struck me that when a teacher, I think you're actually talking about the teachers, not some other person from the school administration, but the teacher goes to a home, there is an implicit statement about power. Your home has enough power to pull me here and put me on your turf. And that's very empowering. And I would like you to comment on that reality.
Well, the Parent-Teacher Home Visit Project, which is out of Sacramento, has a particular strategy when they do home visits. So there are a lot of different home visit initiatives around the country. But this one in particular actually thinks a lot about power and the sharing of power and starting to build a relationship that is more about equity and the equitable sharing of power. So first of all, when the teachers, and sometimes it's not just teachers, but it can be any of the school staff, so anyone who wants to build relationships with families, it could be the school nurses, librarians, other staff. We even have some districts, in some cases, where the school security folks also do home visits to break down that barrier between the security people and families. We go into the home, it's always done with an appointment, never just show up. And the first question that the practitioners ask is, what are your hopes and dreams for your child? They do not bring in any paper, pencils, right? So there's another way of shifting the power. We're not here to evaluate you as a family. What we are here to do is to learn from you. You have knowledge about your child that we need to be the best practitioners we can be. And so in that exchange, and I've interviewed many parents who have experienced this type of home visit, they say, this is the first time anybody validated my knowledge. Anybody made me feel like I was important to the enterprise of my child's learning and development. So you're right, this particular type of home visit is structured so that we can begin to have a more equal relationship when it comes to power. Thank you for that question.
I am not a teacher. However, I have a daughter-in-law who is a 5th grade teacher. Takes her about a half hour to get to work each day. She has, besides her husband, 2 teenage children at home. As a practical matter, what kind of time commitment, in addition to the school day from 7:30 in the morning till 3:30 in the afternoon, is going to be required of a teacher of a 30-student classroom to just visit those families twice a year?
So let's say first thing is that home visits are one strategy. There are many, 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 many different strategies, and Tracy Hill is a master at understanding on her staff of the different strategies that are appropriate for different schools. Yes, I've seen home visits done at the high school level, but there are other things that we can do. One of the things that has to happen is the school district and the school central office and the administration and the superintendent have to embrace family engagement as a part of their strategy for improving the district. Because that way what they will do is they will create the time for the teachers and other practitioners to do this work of engaging families. So for example, in Boston, we work very closely with our teachers union to come up with ways that we could take what we were already doing. Because you see, what I find most times is that we are already doing a lot in terms of engaging families. So if we had time today, I'd have you write down 5 events that we already have programmed into most school years to engage families. But then if I ask you about how effective they are, that's a whole other story. So we could probably take some of the things that your daughter is already asked to do when it comes to building partnerships with families, and if we change them to meet those essential conditions that I talked about, we probably could take what she's already doing, repurpose it so that it's more effective. So we're not going to ask her to do more and to, have all this additional time to build partnerships with families. Let's take what we're already doing and make it more effective. So those open houses, those family literacy nights or curriculum nights, which I don't know why we ever, if we want anybody to come to anything, we call it a curriculum night, right? That makes no sense. My friends that are in marketing say, what are you people thinking, right? So we could take a lot of the things that she's doing now, because I know she's doing parent-teacher conferences, I know she's doing open houses, I know she's probably doing these science nights and things like that. If we take them and we make them more effective, she's probably going to see stronger partnerships with her families. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Joan Spurl with the Literacy Cooperative. Can you talk a bit about programs that you know about that have been effective in partnering with families with the children from birth and I know there's something called Boston Basics going on in Boston.
yes.
Maybe talk a little about that, please.
Yep.
Thank you.
A lot of the new work on family engagement is coming out of the 0 to 5 space. And so it's very, very exciting to see what's happening. And so we're trying to engage some of our childcare providers in thinking about that same co-producer and co-creator mindset around family engagement. And so we're now starting to see more and more of the healthcare folks, also again, the childcare providers, thinking about how can we engage families right from the start, where they get to see how key they are in their child's learning and development. How do we validate what they already know about their child and get them more excited about partnering with us? So you mentioned Boston Basics, which is a wonderful program that has been started by a colleague of mine, Ron Ferguson. Some of you may know his work. Isn't he Cleveland? He's from the Cleveland area. So I would encourage you to go online and look up Boston Basics. What he's done is, through the help, by the way, of the Black Philanthropy Fund out of Boston, what he's done is he's developed these beautiful videos, which what they do is they highlight 5 things that we can do as adult caretakers to really help support our children's learning and development from the years of, right from birth to age 5. And the videos, have your tissues ready. The videos are spectacular. They are spectacular, and they will just grab your heart. Again, you will see in those videos how families are treated with respect, and their assets are really highlighted, and not, well, this is what you should do. It's families talking about what they do to support their children's learning when their children are just little babies. So they're wonderful. I highly recommend the Boston Basics, that you take a look at it. And now it's just called the Basics, because what's happening is that they're being sourced throughout the country. We actually, I think in Brazil, now have the Brazil Basics. They've taken the same videos, translated them, and they're using them in other parts of the world.
Hi, thank you so much. My name is Roxanne Jaber, and I'm calling about, I'm not calling in.
She's here.
I'm asking about, I'm so used to calling. I've only heard this
here.
on the home visit. I'm thinking from a social work perspective of some of the fear and the intimidation of a home visit. And so when you talk about it, I know showing respect, disarming the family, but getting that initial in is so hard, because so many families that experience trauma, especially in lower socioeconomic areas, are afraid that a home visit would be a call to children's services, that there might be something in the home that would put them at risk of losing their children. I don't know. I'm just thinking. I worked for Wadico in Chicago, in Boston, back in the day, and I know that was a big issue then. So how do you get over that hurdle?
Well, first of all, we should also talk about the fear on both sides, okay? Because it's just not just that the parents are fearful, the practitioners are fearful. Because again, they have these implicit biases about what they might find in homes or in neighborhoods that they haven't visited before. And so there's a training that's done beforehand where we talk about our implicit biases. What are some of the things that might prevent us from actually really seeing those families? Because if we already have a mindset about who we're going to meet and who we're going to see, maybe when we see those families, it's going to take a minute for us to really say, oh my goodness, this is not what I expected. So we have to work on that fear on both sides. Now, one of the things is that the teachers in the room may not know this, but parents really respect teachers. They really, really do. And so when the teacher calls, and that parent knows my child is in your classroom, and when the teacher says, I would love to visit with you because I need to learn from you. You are your child's first teacher. And as your child's first teacher, in order for me to be the best teacher I can possibly be, I would love to sit and talk to you to learn what you know that can help me in my classroom. That's a very different dialogue and narrative between home and school than we're going to come and check up for XYZ reason. The other thing is that when the families see that there's no paper and pencils involved, they feel calmer. And Carrie Rose, if she were here, she is the founder of this, she would tell you that in the 20, 30, 40, 50,000 home visits, they did 50,000 home visits around the country this year. They've never had an incident, never had a problem. What usually happens is when you go to the home, the families want to show you their best. And so what you see is usually, everybody all dressed up, be ready to gain weight because families cook for you, and you see the many generations and the children are there. So it's a very, very different kind of feel to this visit. Good question, thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm from Columbus area, and we live in a relatively affluent community, and they started doing some home visits there, and I was rather surprised with the resistance that they met with the parents there. And I'm wondering if and how the conversation changes around the idea of home visits when you're working with more affluent communities. I feel like most of the research really focuses on more of the urban settings and places where the teachers who teach are very different background culturally than the students they serve.
Well, I would have to learn more about how the home visit was presented to the parents, because I have seen that this model works, regardless of parents' socioeconomic background. But those initial few phone calls that happen before the home visit are really important to let the parent know that this is a way of us working together to try to make sure your student is going to get the best education possible. So I don't know, how the home visiting program was introduced. Those phone calls are so important. We also say start with the willing. So you want to definitely start with practitioners and with families who will agree. And by the way, the visit doesn't have to happen in the home. It could happen at the coffee shop. It could happen in the car. So it doesn't have to happen in the home. So I would have to see, because this program has particular non-negotiables about how it's done. And that's why I say just don't go out and say, oh, we want to do home visits, or oh, we want to do some of these different strategies, unless people understand what are the non-negotiables about it and get trained. Very important.
Yes. Once you have our school does home visits, and they're great, and they establish that relationship. But in connection with what that man said about his daughter, who's a teacher, teachers' lives are very busy, and we ask our teachers to do a lot of things. My question is, what have you found in technology that has helped keep up the homeschool relationship? What works better, texts or phones or platforms that you know of? Because we use some, and I just would like to know about others.
Thank you for that great question. My colleague Todd Rogers is doing a lot of research on the impact of texting and mailings and things like that. And first of all, if you can't do home visit, like I say, I'm not up here to be a promoter of home visits. That's one strategy that you can use. But once you build that relationship, because remember that was the first thing on my list, so perhaps it's at a family conference night, or perhaps it's with welcoming phone calls that are done before school starts. What you're going to see is families are more willing to give you information about their cell phone numbers and things like that. And families love texting. They love that. So we have a lot of schools and districts around the country who are now using texting to send pictures of kids doing work, or at the high school level, if they're on trips, to show families what's happening. And families do love that. But the relationship has to come first. That's the big piece, because all of these other pieces won't work if there's no trust, right? That's up to the microphone person, I think, has gone away. You can ask me after, okay? Great. Hi.
Hi. I absolutely loved your comment about the belief that every child has a caring adult who will take a vested interest in their education. I'm wondering if you can speak to any of the strategies used to, if the birth parent is struggling with chronic homelessness, substance abuse, really in an ongoing crisis, how do you find that extended network and family members who are maybe more stable, and how do you then partner with them to bring them to the table?
So I know that I believe Cleveland is looking at sort of the full community school concept. full service community school concept. And this is a great way to have various partners come together to offer support services to family in need. And many times when that happens, you draw in the various adult caretakers who can then be connected with to provide more and more support for the child. So sometimes it takes a little time. Eileen will tell you, she's a pit bull when it comes to making sure that she finds someone in that family. Sometimes she'll ask the child, who's somebody that if I needed to talk to them, to tell them how wonderful you are as a student, who could I call? So she really does that investigative work. But I think through the full service programs, that is another way to do it. And let me just say something about that. Let me give you sort of a word of caution. I see a lot of communities doing what we now call sort of collective impact work and working, to build all sorts of full service for families. But I just want to make sure, and you'll hear that this has been a theme through my talk about sharing power. Please make sure that the people who are most affected by these programs are on your decision-making teams. Okay? They have to be on the decision-making teams. I visited many of these, collective impact and design thinking things, and I look in the room and I see the business partners and I see the health community and I see the churches. I don't see the parents and the kids. And that is going to doom your efforts, ladies and gentlemen. I'm not kidding. What happens is that you come up with these wonderful programs, but if families and the students and the community members have not been there from the beginning, not you all go off and design all this wonderful stuff without them and say, look what we've come up with for you, right? Doesn't work. Doesn't work because it's not authentic and you're not, again, building on their funds of knowledge because that knowledge will help that initiative, when it is designed, be authentic for the families and communities it's supposed to serve. So you have been warned because I know I've come to, a lot of times people have me come to try to fix it after it's already been, how come our parents don't want this? How come our parents don't show up? And I'll ask the one question, were they involved in the design? And if the answer is no, I pack my pocketbook up and say, can't do anything for you now because you're going to have to go back and talk to them about what they feel is important. So please don't make that mistake, okay? We have time for a couple more. Hi.
Hi, this is quick. Have you found any role for PTOs or PTAs to play in all this?
Absolutely, but some of the work that we need to do with our PTOs and our PTAs is to make sure that they represent the families and the communities they are serving. And that is one of the things the PTA is really trying to do is to make sure that the components of the PTAs and the PTOs really are representative of all families, right? And this is a particular thing I'm interested in because in many of our communities in the country, and I know this is happening in Cleveland, where we're seeing the demographics shift. Sometimes it's a different ethnic group, sometimes it's a different socioeconomic group. So some of our neighborhoods that may have been high poverty communities are now becoming more sort of socioeconomically diverse. How do we make sure that those family engagement initiatives are also diverse? And that takes work, intentional work. So the principal, the other school leaders, the PTO has to constantly say, are we doing the equity work in our membership? Are we making sure that we have everyone's voices represented? Not just one, if we've got 20 people, one person who looks like some of the other students. It's got to be balanced. And so a lot of times we've actually done diversity training with PTOs and PTA groups because they need to be thinking about, are we engaged in equitable practice in our PTAs and our PTOs? Okay, so yes, especially if they have been traditionally very much engaged in family engagement in schools. I also say, are our PTAs and our PTOs following those essential conditions and practices? okay? Relationships, link to learning, etc. Okay? Very important groups.
Really, really good talk. Thank you so much. Today at the City Club of Cleveland, we've been enjoying a Friday forum with Dr. Karen L. Mapp, Program Director of the Education Policy and Management Master's Program at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. Our forum today is the Cyrus Eaton Memorial Forum, made possible by a generous gift from the Cyrus Eaton Foundation. We are honored to have Cyrus Eaton's grandson, Dr. Robert Lefebvre, and his great-grandson, that's Cyrus Eaton's great-grandson, not Bob's great-grandson, Matt Eaton, with us today. Thank you so much for joining us, both of you. So many teachers in the room, I'm just reminded how much grammar matters. Dr. Mapp appears as part of our Resilient Families series, sponsored by the St. Luke's Foundation and the William J. and Dorothy K. O'Neill Foundation. We deeply appreciate your ongoing support of City Club programming. Our community partners today include the Cleveland Transformation Alliance, Family Connections of Northeast Ohio, and the Positive Education Program. Student participation in City Club forums is provided by many foundations, including the William M. Weiss Foundation. We thank all of you for being here today. That brings us to the end of our program. Thank you, Dr. Mapp. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Our forum is adjourned.
For information on upcoming speakers or for podcasts of the City Club, go to cityclub.org.
Production and distribution of City Club forums on IdeaStream are made possible by the generous support of PNC and the Raskin Family Fund, with additional funding from Robert Conrad, Cleveland State University, the Chautauqua Institution, the Payne Fund, and the United Black Fund of Greater Cleveland, Incorporated.